Hey guys, we are back today with some more information on the presidents. Today we're going to talk about James Madison, which is basically the War of 1812, the most obscure war that you will ever probably hear about in this class. All right, first let's talk about who James Madison was. So he's like all the other guys in the beginning have been around for forever. He's more of the quiet type. He's actually kind of short and sickly and super pale. Um, but he is a brilliant thinker and he is, of course, the father of the Constitution. He was originally a Federalist, but after seeing the power of the federal government, he's going to be turned into a Democratic Republican and works with Jefferson to really create the solidarity of the party. He's going to be a president for 2 terms, like Thomas Jefferson, but his presidency is pretty much plagued by the War of 1812 and everything that leads up to it. So let's talk about what your big idea is. If you look at your work, everything that's in red is what your answer should look like. Now, that doesn't mean copy and paste, but if that's what you're going to do, make sure you at least read it so you understand it. So, the big idea, big thing we're going to be talking about is that war is going to break out between the United States and Great Britain. We call this pretty much the American Revolution #2 because we're fighting over unfixed issues, um, that remained from that war. Um, what this is ultimately going to do is confirm American independence, remind Britain that we are our own nation, and in the outcome, we're finally going to have our own culture. We have established ourselves as Americans. We are different from Britain. We are different from Europe. So we are going to strengthen nationalism. I'm not going to talk about Uncle Sam because you guys can go and read in your book, but pretty much this is where we get the idea of Uncle Sam from. He is a representation of nationalism. That's why you can see him today in all of our war posters, especially when it was like World War II. He symbolizes American hard work and honesty, which is what we like to use as our national pride. We are Americans. We work hard. We have honest work, all that lovely jazz. All right, let's talk about what happened with Jefferson. So, under Jefferson, we had issues with trade. We had a blockade in place from Napoleon. Napoleon is the French leader, so he was blocking our trade with Britain. Then you had Britain returning by blocking our trade with France. We couldn't get a word in edgewise, so we're trying to figure out what's going on. The way that Jefferson had handled it was by saying, you know what, screw it. We're not going to have any trade with any foreign nations. We're going to keep to ourselves. And he was doing it to try and prove neutrality. Now, if you know anything about trade, think about what would happen today if the United States tried to cut off trade with the rest of the world because we were trying to prove neutrality. Well, we would go bankrupt immediately. So the United States back then, not too different. We had all of our imports drop by millions and millions of dollars. It hurt us economically. The Federalists were angry. The Democratic Republicans didn't know what to do. So the Embargo Act of 1807 was ultimately a failure. It did not work. So the way that President Madison responds is going to be a little bit different. When he comes into office, he's going to start something called the Nonintercourse Act. What that means is that we are going to lift the embargo. We're going to trade with all countries except for France and Britain, because they're the 2 countries that we're trying to prove neutrality to. We're tired of them messing with us. We're tired of them getting involved in our shipping. So we tell them both, we are not going to trade with you, except we put in a specific clause to try and catch their attention. What is called is Macon's Bill #2. So this is what we call a loophole. This guy named Nathaniel Macon is going to write in an exception saying, hey, we're not going to trade with Britain and France unless one of them comes forward and respects American neutrality. Now, if that happens, and one of them comes forward and says, yeah, we'll stop messing with you. We'll be friends with you again. Then we would promise to put an embargo on the other country. So let's see how that actually turns out. Napoleon. Napoleon is a dictator. He is going to be the first one to step forward and say, you know what, America, we are so sorry for messing with your ships. We promise to uphold American neutrality. We promise to uphold American neutrality. In other words, he's going to try and make sure that Britain gets the embargo. So we take France at its word. We promise Napoleon that we will place an embargo on Great Britain, and we do so in 1811. Now, America should have known early on, but if you know anything about dictators, they don't really stick to their words. So, Napoleon, immediately after we place the embargo on Great Britain, does not actually follow what we're supposed to. He continues to seize American ships. So now what we've done is dug ourselves into a little hole. We have proven that we are not being neutral because we placed an embargo on Britain and made friends with France. Now, that was our mistake because we just put ourselves into a bad position. Flashback to what's happening in the United States. So that was foreign affairs, what's happening under Madison. At the same time, we're having problems on the frontier. We're trying to expand ourselves. We are trying to go out west, get all this new land, and make more states so that we can grow big and strong. Indiana Governor William Henry Harrison in 1809 is going to convince Native Americans to give away 3 million acres of tribal land. Now, pause for a second. Can a state governor get land from Native Americans? Your answer should be no, because that is a national government rule. Only the national government can get land from the Native Americans. So this was not done in a correct manner. But remember, we're just trying to get land. So he convinces them to give it away, but there are some natives who disagree with the way that that happens. Tecumseh is going to be the Shawnee leader who refused to give up the land. He says, no, this is our tribal land. This is our history. And he's going to try and do similarly what Pontiac way back when tried to do when we were still colonies. Tecumseh is going to try and unite the tribes in the area to fight back and remove all white civilization. So he is trying to take it to the very extreme, get rid of any white people whatsoever so that they can go back to having a fully Native American land. He seeks assistance from Great Britain. Great Britain is not far away. They still have not completely evacuated all of the forts that were focused out in the West, and they still exist in Canada. So the natives are going to ask to use British guns. Using those guns, there's going to be a battle. So this is where you had the brother of Tecumseh is going to use the guns given from Great Britain to attack William Henry Harrison and those living in Indiana. So while Tecumseh is off trying to make negotiations, protect the land, his brother is going to take those British given guns and go and fight the Americans. Now, the Americans are going to be the winners, but they're going to point out very quickly that, oh, Britain was the one supplying the guns, therefore Britain must be taken down. So this is just going to aid in that buildup against Great Britain. There's a new group coming to power in Congress while this is happening, and they're called the War Hawks. Now, it shouldn't take you too long to realize this, but the War Hawks are calling for war. They are very strong nationalists. They feel that our honor as Americans has been challenged. So if you think about people who get super offended as soon as somebody talks bad about America today, these are those kind of people. They feel that Britain is encouraging violence at sea as well as on our own frontier, and therefore war is the only way that we can maintain control over our land. We have to prove to the British yet again that we are strong enough to take care of ourselves. Now, the Warhawks are not dumb. They're also thinking ahead. They know that there's land owned by the British in America, and if we win, we could potentially take land from the British. In other words, we could take Canada. Now, that's way too far down the lane, but we really are looking at calling for war. So let's look at our Republicans versus our Federalists. So those who are supporting the war are going to be your Republicans. Those are your strong nationalists. They are the war hawks. Those who oppose the war are Federalists. This is because the Federalists like Great Britain. We want to keep those maritime waters open. We want to keep our ties open with them so we can trade with them. But your Federalists are going to pretty much say, Madison, the only reason you want to go to war is because you want to look high and mighty and powerful as a president. You ever learn anything about history, presidents who go to war get remembered. So the Federalists are saying, no, we should not go to war. Madison is going to get elected for his second term, which pretty much showed that the public was on board with going to war. When he wins his reelection and he chooses to go to war, he explains very carefully to the American people, to the Republicans who want to go to war, and to the Federalists who don't want to go to war, that Britain is at fault. They are trying to strangle our trade and they are hurting our economy. If we just sit by and do nothing, they will continue to try and run us over. We can't let that happen. So the only answer that we have is war. Now, let me put this into picture for you. At the time when we declare war in 1812, we are disunited as a country. We've got your Federalists versus your Republicans, your North versus South, your Westerners are now starting to show up, all kinds of sectionalism happening. We are unprepared because we cut down the Army and the Navy under Jefferson. We tried to restrict that. And we don't really have much money because we'd cut taxes. So we're not the most prepared to go to war, but you know what? We're going to ride the wave and see what happens.